Going to be doing a slightly different product review today. Since I've been slightly craving the classic figures recently, I decided to travel all the way back to 2008 and take a look at the first ever figures that were released as part of classic Doctor Who figures Wave 1, including some Doctors and some villains. It was a very exciting time for Doctor Who. I can recall actually opening the issue of Doctor Who Adventures and seeing these advertised with my favourite Doctor stood at the very front of the promotional image. It was an exciting Christmas that year of getting all of these figures. Didn't have a clue who some of them were. However, I solely bought them, one, because they looked cool and they were a part of Doctor Who history, and arguably this line could possibly be one of the reasons I actually delved into classic Doctor Who a little bit sooner. In this review, I'm going to be taking a look at all the figures that were released in this wave and sort of a little bit of a brief summary, briefly taking a look at some of the things that I like, dislike, and generally overall having sort of one large review, so I hope you enjoy. Taking a look at the packaging that these figures came in. Of course, I don't have the original boxes because these figures were released back in 2008, since I've just found some images on Google to give you a little bit of an idea of what the packaging would have looked like. So as you can see, the box is a little bit unusual, as this is a classic line. We do still have the use of the new series logo, of course the David Tennant one that we've seen quite a lot on merchandise. This was later changed, however, for the majority of the classic line, this logo did in fact stay. The box is generally pretty standard. As you can see in the background, we do get a blue vortex design along with the logo at the very top, along with postable action figure in a bubble. Generally, the figures are all displayed nicely in a circular bubble, and the Magnus Green and Mr. Sin one is slightly larger than all the others due to it having one extra figure. And as you can clearly see, the Careworn Robot parts are all nicely displayed with the figure as well, along with the name cards at the very bottom. You could technically class that all of these figures are in fact brand new releases for this whole line. However, if you are going to be picky, technically the 5th Doctor in this line is a second release due to the Time Crash set being released a few months previously. Taking a look at the back of the box now, there isn't really too much going on, just your generic Doctor's dates at the very bottom, along with some company information, along with a little bit more information about the collect and build Careworn Robot. So that's basically it for the box. Generally overall pretty nice, and I just wish they would kind of go back to the design a little bit more like this. It is a little bit more simple, as opposed to the diamond design that we got a little bit later. However, I did like how classic that design was. So where not best to start our look back at classic series Doctor Who Wave 1 figures, then with probably the most iconic Doctor of them all, it is of course the 4th Doctor. And if you're a classic figure collector, you will no doubt have this figure already, as it was released a number of times. Of course, firstly in this wave, the original one, then we have the 4th Doctor Adventure set, the 4th Doctor and TARDIS. I do believe it also got a few independent releases in the USA as well. Basically, it's quite a common figure. If it's in the box, it's worth a little bit more, I guess, but it is generally your generic 4th Doctor from his early years as the Doctor. You're talking the Ark in Space, maybe Revenge of the Cybermen, especially Robot. It's pretty much your average, very early beginning 4th Doctor. It's quite a nice detailed figure, of course with the swappable heads and the sonic screwdriver that we've seen many times once again re-released, but it is pretty much your substandard Doctor, which still looks pretty cool. It is sort of an underestimated figure. However, after you've had quite a few of them, you do tend to just sort of shove them towards the side a little bit. So taking a closer look at him, there isn't really too much to talk about, just flipping back the scarf a little bit, which on the earlier releases was a lot more flimsy compared to the ones that we get these days. So starting off at the bottom there, we get the cardigan with some rather nice detail, to be honest. We have the yellow and white checkered pattern there, along with the greenish tie, which has been done rather well. Once again, this is an independent piece, along with the sculpt underneath as well. Assumably, this would have been when they were going to strip it off and put the Pyramids of Mars waistcoat underneath to replicate a proper Planet of Evil Doctor, but we never, of course, got that for some reason. Don't know why, but then we have a little checkered pattern underneath as well on the shirt, so generally pretty well done. The jacket itself, there isn't really too much to talk about. We do have the detailing there of a few pockets and a few big creases, as well as the big bags at the very bottom of the jacket as well, replicating the many things the 4th Doctor did carry on him. On the back, we get the belt along with some shoulder pads as well, along with the detailing of a few buttons, and then of course at the very bottom we do get the trousers. Nothing really too much to talk about here. And of course at the very bottom we do get the Spattish like 4th Doctor shoes, once again with a little bit of highlight on there. Talking about the scarf now, it does have a nice amount of detail. As you can see, we have the different sections nicely done with all the different colours, but oddly the original 4th Doctor tends to have a little bit of a dirtied look on the scarf, as you can see, especially towards the bottom there on the lighter cream section. It does tend to be a little bit more battered, and I do quite like that, once again replicating how it is in the series. We have the sonic screwdriver. I'm not even going to lie to you and say that this is the original version. I don't even know if it is, because I've had that many over the years. Chances are might be. It does look like this anyway, so as you can see we have many different sections on there, very nicely detailed. And then of course at the top we get the black band and the red emitter. So generally finishes off the figure nicely, and it's nice to see that the hand has been sculpted to hold the sonic screwdriver. First head of the figure that we of course got was the manic grin. As you can see, it's been rather well detailed. The teeth have been individually sculpted rather nicely, along with the paint apps to the lips, and then we of course have the curly hair in there as well, and the hat has been generally sculpted rather nicely as well in a light grey and a little bit of a darker band on there. It's a rather nice one, and to be honest, I think I always had this one displayed for my 4th Doctor as opposed to the other version. We of course have the second head. This is your much more relaxed 4th Doctor figure, as you can see, especially compared to that of the previous head that was very manic with the giant evil looking grin, but this is the more sort of normal, rather maybe even peeved off 4th Doctor. As you can see, he looks like he's been sulking a little bit. So once again, nothing really too much to talk about on this. There isn't really that much standout detail. The eyes have been done pretty well, but other than that, it does tend to be sort of a little bit simple, especially in the face. Not really too many details that are that sharp. And then of course on the hair, we do get a few nice details, so however, have a rather nice light brush stroke in there as well, bring out a few of the curls and things. So that is rather nice. And once again, it would have been nice to maybe see a hatted version of this head at this point, but you know, having 2 heads in this set was enough as it is, and it was until later that we of course got this head with a hatted top. So yeah, that is nice to see that they did eventually do that. Doing a little bit of a comparison now to some of the other 4th Doctor figures that were released. To be honest, upon inspection, it actually seems the original version of the 4th Doctor contained the sharpest paint apps, and then it would of course be the Pyramids of Mars version after that. And to be honest, I rather much like the 4th Doctor from season 18 figure as well. I think that the paint apps on the much more wilder hair look really good, the way that he's been aged quite a lot as well. But we have a little bit of a rough patch in between, especially with the Destiny and City of Death 4th Doctors, and especially the Keeper of Traken one at the very back, which just seems to be slightly possessed by something. They did have a little bit of a blip where the eyes were all over, the lips were a little bit of an unusual colour. So yeah, it was technically a rather bumpy ride for the 4th Doctor era, to be honest. It definitely started out on a high and sort of ended on a high as well, really. So next up, we may as well go in chronological order. We of course have the 5th Doctor from Wave 1. Now, unlike the 4th Doctor figure, I do believe that this particular version of the 5th Doctor was only in fact ever released in this wave, and it is a rather unusual one, considering the 4th Doctor has his giant long scarf and the grin, the 6th Doctor has his colourful coat, and the 5th Doctor has his celery. However, the first ever 5th Doctor figure, they decided to not release the celery and instead go for a Castrovalva variant where it didn't have the celery for the majority of the story. For those of you that have seen the previous videos where I've spoke about the 5th Doctor figure, it's one of those ones that doesn't particularly get me excited in any way, along with a lot of the different 5th Doctor figures. The only one that I do quite like is the one from the 13 Doctors set and the Resurrection of the Daleks Doctor. The other versions are just a little bit dull. I think it might be the 5th Doctor in himself, and I think it might be his costume. I think that both of them just don't exactly have the biggest persona for my liking, I think. But yeah, the 5th Doctor generally is an okay figure. I really like the texture on the jumper, as you can see here. That has been rather nicely replicated. Also, with this being a very early version of the 5th Doctor, we have a much more simpler band at the very top of the cricket jumper, only having the red and the blue banding, and then we of course have a rather nicely stitched section at the very bottom there. The shirt underneath has been detailed rather well. I love the way that we have this sort of shading underneath the actual collar piece along the red button in there as well. The coat has been done rather nicely. Once again, this got a few different versions of many different figures. I like the way that we've got the red lining. This was later changed on the 13 Doctors set to be a little bit more of a orangey colour, and then of course on the very back, once again, nothing really too much to talk about, not even that many creases to be honest. And then on the arms, once again, we do get the detailing of the buttons and a little bit of red lining. He does come with his sonic screwdriver, much like the 4th Doctor. However, it does have a few updated paint apps. We do have a little bit of a gold band and then the red emitter at the top this time to replicate the sonic screwdriver. The 5th Doctor didn't in fact really have for too long, as he got rid of it in the Visitation, which I do believe of his 5th or 6th story from what I can remember. I don't particularly know, but yeah, we also have his trousers at the very bottom there as well, which are a little bit of an odd colour, involving a little bit of green in there, which I do believe was something that was taken away from the other figures of the other costumes in the later series. But yeah, it kind of looks like the 5th Doctor. Once again, we don't really have too many standout details. His eyebrows are quite unusual though, however, being a little bit of a murky yellow colour, but I do like the wash that has been applied to the hair. Once again, some nice detailing on that to create that of the sort of more swept back look. I love the way you have a little bit of detailing with the darker shades and patches in there as well. The facial expression, once again, doesn't really have too much going on, but it still looks like the 5th Doctor, and I still think that it is generally pretty good. Comparing this 5th Doctor to the other 5th Doctors available, to be quite honest, I think this is my least favourite of them all. I really like the Resurrection version, especially with the darker trousers. I also like the 4th Doctor regenerated version here as well. I really like the more bushier head sculpt that we got with that one. And I think probably one of my favourites is especially the Comic Con version with the Panama hat. Of course, at the very back there, we do get the 11 Doctors set version, which is basically the figure that I've just been reviewing. However, with the celery applied, of course, later we did find out that they would love re-releases in this line, so therefore that is when we did eventually get the celery celery on the figure. I just find this version, as I say, a little bit dull, especially considering one of its main traits is of course absent. However, it's still an okay variant to the collection. Moving on to the Sixth Doctor, played by the wonderful Colin Baker. Looking back, it is of course rather unusual that on the first wave of classic figures that we ever got, we actually got the Sixth Doctor. From a marketing perspective, it might just because he's a very brightly coloured Doctor. His coat is very standout, much like the Fourth Doctor. I'm not even complaining that we got him, because even at the state of me being a 9-year-old child, I still absolutely loved the Sixth Doctor at that time, only after seeing him in one story. So I think that he's definitely a very bold choice, and a good one, that we actually got him in this line so early on. So taking a close look at the Sixth Doctor figure, to be quite honest, and I'm not even going to say this because Colin is of course my favourite Doctor, but it is generally a really good figure. It's probably one of the best figures of the whole wave. They've replicated the costume from what I've seen in this series incredibly well. I think that even people that don't like the Sixth Doctor would agree with that. It is generally one of the most challenging costumes you could probably ever do in a figure. Do you go simplistic? Do you go more complicated like how it actually was in the real show? It's generally a really baffling thing. However, they've done a really good job. So starting off at the top, we do have the collar, detailed nicely with the red question mark, something that was prominent on the Fifth Doctor figure. Then we have the blue cravat, once again detailed rather nicely. I do like the depth in this, so we have a little bit going over the top to replicate the piece that actually flaps over this piece below, along with the little details there of the white polka dot. So the waistcoat, which once again is a rather complicated piece that does look rather unusual in the TV series. Is it a dark brown? Is it purple? It is very unusual looking, so we do get the detail there of a few sort of light blue buttons, along with a rather nice purpley detailing there, along with a few pink highlights, along with some really nice green chains. Now, I do believe Sixth Doctor wise, this is from his earlier half of the era, so like the Twin Dilemma, maybe Attack of the Cybermen from what I can recall. I don't particularly know. Generally, I like to refer to this as the first season Sixth Doctor, really, as an overall general summary. And then, of course, at the very bottom, we do get the lovely yellow and black striped trousers, very nicely done, along with the green shoes at the bottom and the red spats. And then, of course, we have the infamous coat itself. The cat badge has been replicated rather nicely, although it was a lot more detailed on the more upcoming releases, such as the 11 Doctor set version from Terror of the Vervoids. It had a lot more detail on there. That is generally probably one of the poorest cat badges that we did in fact get. And then, of course, on the very back, we get the majority of the coat in all of its glory. We have lots of different sections on this, many different shades up here. I like, once again, the dirty effect that we've got applied to the top, along with the many different lines and different sections. Considering a lot of figures have paint bleed, surprisingly, of all figures, this one doesn't seem to have much. So it's nice to see that they have replicated incredibly well. And generally, the likeness does look a lot like Colin also. I think that the Terror of the Vervoids version and the real-time Sixth Doctor may be a little bit better, but generally they've replicated what is seen in the TV series, and this-wise, it does look a lot like Colin, with the different highlights on the hair, especially some of the darker highlights there on the back as well. Such a beautiful sight this is to behold. Taking a look at the Sixth Doctor compared to the other Sixth Doctor figures that we did, of course, get, I do have the 13 Doctor set version of the big finished Sixth Doctor figure, but that is, of course, nicely all packed away in its actual display box on the top of my entire Doctor Who display, and to be honest, I can't be bothered getting it out, and that occurs for the Fourth Doctor figure and the Fifth Doctor one as well. So yeah, I just generally don't want to get out of the box, as it would take a lot of hassle. But this figure, once again, a similar case to the Fourth Doctor, was released quite a few times. We did have it in the Revelation of the Dalek set, of course, with the Revelation Blue Morning Cloak that is on the right, and then we of course have this figure pretty much exactly released, exactly the same once again in the Attack of the Cybermen set, along with the Rogue Cyberman. But yeah, generally a really nice amount of Sixth Doctors that we got. I love that we got the blue real-time version of the Sixth Doctor and the Terror of the Vervoids one, but generally I think the Terror of the Vervoids one does seem to have the upper hand against the Wave 1 version, and definitely my favourite figure entirely of the Sixth Doctor is of course the Big Finish version from the 13 Doctor set. I just simply love that figure, and the real-time version is excellent as well. So yeah, generally overall a nicely detailed figure, and one of which that I wish I could sort of recreate the happiness of opening it on Christmas Day. I just loved getting that figure originally, and I have a lot of happy memories of recreating Dalek fights and Cybermen fights whilst I was like 9 or 10 with this figure. Starting off, taking a look at the monsters and villains of Classic Figures Wave 1 now, and we're definitely kicking off on a high. It is of course Magnus Greel and Mr. Sin from the Talons of Weng Chiang. Now, I loved opening this set. It was one of those ones that I didn't have a clue who the hell these people were, but I just wanted it because the design was absolutely excellent. I think that generally these have been recreated incredibly nicely. It would have been nice to see if this line expanded on the Talons of Weng-Chiang. We could have got tons of figures from this episode, a Victorian Leela, Victorian Sherlock 4th Doctor, of course a Igon Lightfoot I would have absolutely adored, and even a Li Hens Chang. Literally, they should have done a whole collector set of the Talons of Weng-Chiang, even maybe a giant rat. But yeah, this was released back in the days of when this set literally only cost around £10 or £12.99, something like that. So I do believe that these two figures may still remain as two of the most expensive figures from especially Classic Figures Wave 1, because it's never been released again. It's one of those ones that was literally a one trick, you buy it and then it's gone straight away. So yeah, generally if you can get your hands on this one, I highly recommend it. Taking a closer look at the costume, once again we have a little bit of a difficult situation, because in the story it was generally pretty dark and we never really got a decent look at the actual costume and all the different many details, but they've captured what is seen in the story incredibly well. I love the way that they sort of recreated that almost Chinese-like velvety design to an extent, having all those different flares and things and the different sort of pin-ups of gold towards the side. Of course, starting off at the very base of the figure, we do almost get this green skirt-like piece along with a golden band in the middle, along with sort of this sash section, once again with a little bit of a green stippling design in there. Once again, really nicely recreated. On the actual long coat itself, it really nicely flares out. I love the way that this has been sculpted. Once again, lots of different gold sections in there, really nicely recreating the material that it's been made from. Once again, I do absolutely love this figure. I love the way that once again on the arms, it has in fact been flared out, so you have this round nice cuffed section, which doesn't really work when you lift it up like that as so, because it kind of sort of defies gravity to an extent. But I think that once you have the figure as so like this, it really does look right the way that we have it all dangling down. I do absolutely love the way that's been done. And then we of course have the head. This is of course one of two that were available, the unmasked version. Once again, rather gruesome looking. We have the eye towards the side there and a rather normal looking face, or at least as normal as you can get for Magnus Greel. And then towards the opposite side, we've got all the different mangled bits of flesh dripping out. Rather gruesome, to be honest. And then on the very back, it's exactly the same for the other head as well. We just get the different panelled sections. Yeah, a really nice figure. He does stand up. He's one of those ones that you do need to get him in a particular area to stand up correctly. I don't seem to have many problems with him, to be honest, but a few people do. But yeah, generally, I really like this one. Then briefly taking a look at the masked face, as you can see, nothing really too much going on. Exactly the same around the back. However, we do get all the different nice panelled sections, once again replicating what is seen in the Talons of Weng-Chiang really nicely. And then we have one of the main highlights of Wave 1 as a whole. I absolutely love this figure. It is, of course, Mr. Sin. Now, this is probably one of the most highly detailed small figures that we ever got in the character options line. It has been recreated incredibly well. Once again, a similar design to Magnus Greel. I love the way that we have this sort of gold stippled section there to replicate that of the embossing of, once again, a rather sort of Chinesey style of design. Once again, really well done. I love the way that we have this rope section going around the side, which has been rather nicely sculpted. And the costume itself does tend to be rather simple, because he is, of course, a puppet in the story, or at least a rather mental puppet that is about to kill you and throw knives and chuck you out of windows, or whatever else he did in that story. All I can remember pretty well is that bloody good laugh. But yeah, of course, on the very back there, once again, the red checkered design along with a few sort of crease sections. On the very bottom, we get his very, very tiny little feet, and I love the way we also have a little bit of articulation in there as well. It does move a little bit. He is pretty good for the size, to be honest. And then we even have a little pouch section in there, which does, of course, have his little knife, so you can have him wielding there, much like how he did to Leela, looking incredible. And then we, of course, have the face as well. Once again, absolutely excellent the way that this has been done. We have lots of different sections of almost like ridging areas, very much like how the mask did look in the actual story. All the different lighter grey sections in there, and the black highlights. And then we, of course, get the hair itself, once again, nicely tied back in the bun, along with a little piece going back to the side there. A little bit of sort of almost PVC texture to an extent. But yeah, generally really nice. And I love the way we also have the recreation of the little sort of mustache and beard as well. Generally, a really good figure, and I'm not even kidding by saying this is probably one of my favourite figures of all time. I just love it. I think he looks excellent as well with Magnus Greel. For Magnus Greel and Mr. Sin, honestly one of the best sets that was ever released in the classic line, and to this day, considering we're probably never going to get really any classic figures again, or at least any new classic figures, I think it is an absolute crime that we never got any more from the Talons of Weng-Chiang. It was such a merchandisable story, to be honest, but I'm glad that we got these two, because they're bloody great. Next up, it is, of course, the Sea Devils, one of the most iconic classic monsters once again. I think the main aim for the original classic figures was to try and get the most iconic ones out there, because even if they didn't do well in sales and then they would eventually get cancelled or something like that, at least they would have released the ones that people would have most wanted, and that is why we got the Sea Devil a little bit before we got the Third Doctor figure, which might have been classed as a little bit unusual. However, this is still a really nice addition to the collection, and one of which that when people think of the classic series, one of the most instant things, or at least for me, is the Third Doctor wielding a sonic screwdriver, and it makes that weird car alarm style of sound, and then they all start screaming and running back into the sea again. It's one of my favourite classic moments of all time, because it looks a little bit weird. But one of the rare occasions when character options decided to merge with the almost clothish style of figures to replicate one of the costumes seen in the story. Once again, I could imagine that this was probably one of the only ways that they could have really replicated it. To be honest, I sort of imagined the actual cloth in the actual episodes being a little bit more of a greeny colour, much like in fact how Daypol did it back in the day. However, this is much more of a creamish style of white cloth, which I don't know if this is just because it was the only thing available, but it is still generally, you know exactly what it's meant to be, and it kind of looks okay. And I'm just glad that mine in fact still has mine, unlike a lot of other Sea Devil figures that I've seen on the market recently that literally don't have this whatsoever, and it's just the sort of almost naked Sea Devil underneath, and it is slightly disturbing. But yeah, we have the head, of course, at the very top. Incredibly well done. They look a little bit weird, but I love the way the Sea Devils look. We have the giant fins, of course, out the back there, moulded really well. We have the giant piercing eyes there, once again, which I do believe the detailing on them was improved with the later release, but it has still done rather nicely. I love the detailing for the nose as well, and the rather derpy looking smile in there as well. Could you class that as a smile? I don't particularly know, but yeah, generally the paint apps on this are more sort of greeny orangey design, a little bit more bright compared to the other version. Then we of course get the fingers, once again your standard 4 fingers and a thumb in there as well, painted green, and the same textures, but once again being applied on the opposite side as well, a little bit of a sort of almost scaly pattern. And then of course at the very bottom, once again a similar design to the actual face with a little bit of green and yellow mixed together, along of course with the fins at the bottom there as well. So generally a really nice figure. I love the way that they've replicated the cloth as well. I love the little band of rubber that we get around the side to of course hold the one accessory this figure comes with. Once again, this was changed on the later release. It is of course the gun thing. I think it may have had another name, like I don't really know, it's not much of a gun, is it? But yeah, the weird thing that had almost the plate device in the story. I know it is a gun, but you know, it probably had a more complicated name, but I like the way that's been done once again with the gold and silver paint apps, and it is nice to see that that does in fact also sit within the little pouch as well, and sometimes does go missing on the figure shelf, which gets incredibly annoying. But yeah, Sea Devil does fit in really well with the third Doctor figure, and of course the other version of the Sea Devil we did get released a little bit later. I do believe about a year or so later, something like that. I think I do like the second version a little bit more. I definitely prefer the paint apps on that one being a little bit darker, as the other one almost looks a little bit cartoony to an extent. I don't particularly know. I still like it though. I still think the paint apps do replicate what is seen in the Sea Devils pretty well, and generally next to the third Doctor they both look absolutely excellent. And it would have been really nice to eventually see in the classic line maybe a fifth Doctor Sea Devil from the Warriors of the Deep or something like that, or generally their cousins or brothers or whatever they were in relation to the Silurians that still to this day we never got in the classic figure line, which is a real shame. But yeah, generally the Sea Devil looks really cool, and he's not exactly one of the rarest in the line. I do in fact think that one day this figure will most likely be re-released in a B&M set. I'll be surprised if it isn't, but yeah, generally a nice one, and I would highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. Next up we have two fourth Doctor villains. It is of course the Tuvok robots D84 and SV7 from of course the Robots of Death. Once again a rather well-known story when it comes to Doctor Who history. It's one of those ones that once again was released quite a lot when it comes to the classic figures. We got a number of different releases from the Vok robots. These two were in fact sold separately. It's just going to be easier to review them both together as they are pretty much exactly the same sculpt, just painted slightly differently. So of course on the right you do have SV7, generally the leader of the Vok robots, and then we do have D84 as well, the black version, which I do believe from what I can remember you could put on the different stickers and label it whatever D robot you wanted, D47, D28, whatever. But yeah, I do believe you did get a little sticker pad with them. Firstly, I'm going to take a look at SV7 because he's kind of the leader of all of the Robots of Death, or even the Vok robots. He is silver, as you can obviously see. He's more of this silvery green, to be honest, but generally the sculpt for these is pretty simplistic because they were in the actual story. It's generally a standard body with sort of a PVC piece put over the top there, once again, much like how it kind of was in the actual story. So you have the very nice sculpted sections there of the collar, as well as almost this panel section here, along with SV7, nicely printed. Once again, I'm pretty sure the robots in the Robots of Death didn't have labels that were printed in, I'm pretty sure, what is Comic Sans, because that does look like Comic Sans slightly. But yeah, it would have been nice if that was a little bit more accurate to what is seen maybe on the labels. On the back we do have a little bit of room for a sticker once again, however I don't think they had them there in the story. It's almost just for sort of completist reasons, so the neck brace has somewhere to go around the back. But yeah, generally the sculpt for this, you have the same detailing repeated over and over again of almost this puffed section of material, along with this banding around the sides, which have been done in a black and silver. He is very shiny. Then, of course, at the very top there, we get the head, once again replicated rather well. A rather creepy and yet simplistic design. We have all the human features in there, the rather human-looking lips, the very piercing eyes there that have been done nicely in the black, and then generally you have a rather greenish silver tone over the face as well, along with the almost combed back hair, once again with the different sections in sort of the almost bobbish curls, which once again are a little bit weird. The Robots of Death always creeped me out a little bit, but yeah. And then we have once again the arms, which have been done very well on the different band sections on there. And then on this opposite side here, we do of course get the communicator, with SC7 being sort of the leader. He could talk to other people because he had the power and all that, but yeah, then of course at the bottom we do once again get the same section of the repeated tubing design, along with the different puffed sections, and then of course at the very bottom we do get the boots. Yeah, generally a nice figure, a really good leader to have with your other Vok robots, which as you will soon find out, there was quite a lot released in this line. Next up, we of course have D84. He's of course the black one, and D84 of course stands for, I do believe, Dumb 84, because they couldn't talk. And that's very sad, isn't it? Bless him. He's back the same sculpt, but black, and unfortunately, he doesn't have the little label on. I do believe that he did originally have one, but it all fell off because it was just a simple little sticker. So technically, he is a unnamed Vok robot, and it's all very, very sad. But yeah, we do have, once again, exactly the same detailing of the puffed sections. The bands around the side, which I do believe sort of resembled the different ranks of Vok robot, is this time just your standard one band, which is a little bit sad once again. It's not really a good day for him, is it? Because he's the lowest type of Vok robot that you can get. And then once again on the back we do get the same panel section on there. The head has generally been nicely done, where we did have the green sections before. Once again, it does have a little bit of a green tint, to be honest, as well as the black in there as well. However, all of the facial detailing has been brought out very nicely by using some sort of silvery gold bands in there, as well as on the lips as well. Once again, a little bit of a oddly human sculpt. Then at the very bottom, once again, nothing really too much going on, exactly the same design. And this time, of course, he doesn't have the communicator, as that is a different sculpt, much like how they didn't in the actual story. And generally, other than that, he's pretty much exactly the same, although he does have something going for him, because it did of course come with an accessory, unlike SV7. And that accessory is a mutilated, decapitated Vok robot head. What a lovely thing to carry around with you. This is exactly the same details, in fact, of the later releases of Vok robot that we did get, so we of course have all the different separate details of the eyes, the mouth, the nose in there, with the greenish tint. Once again, we do have this little communicator, I do believe, stuck in the bottom there, with a little bit of a paint app there, of some black around the sides. And then on the very back, we do get some, I do believe, circuitry, or even some bodily organs. I don't particularly know. I always think that it looks a little bit like an intestine with all the different pipes and things coming out. I can't recall, because I've not seen the Robots of Death in a very long time. But yeah, it's one of those stories that is one I did in fact like, but I can't remember absolutely anything from it, unfortunately. I really need to get around to watching it again. I like the effect of the cracked design around the face. This figure was originally meant to come with the corpse marker hand as well, with the little circular disc piece on, which that of course was later released in the Fourth Doctor adventure set instead. So it does look like a little bit of a different, disturbing version of a BAFTA or something like that, or one of those acting awards with a weird head on. But yeah, I'm going to put it down now because it's sort of worrying me a little bit. Here we have all of the Vok robots together in their lovely happy Vok family. Oh, how nice. But yeah, this is pretty much all exactly the same sculpt, to be honest. Generally much like how they were in the actual story. We did get two later releases of Vok robot as well. Of course, on the right, we do get the one that was available in the Fourth Doctor adventure set, which is probably the rarest of them all, as the Fourth Doctor adventure set is one of the rarest sets available, so naturally it'll probably be one of the rarest Vok robots. And then on the opposite side, we do get the other V robot available, which was in the Wave 2 of classic figures, which is the one with the red glowing eyes, which is once again a slightly different updated sculpt from the other one, because it has a hole in its head where you can sort of shine a light through, and it looks pretty cool. But yeah, that was a nice addition to the collection. There's also another version planned as well, which was a Vok robot with a knife stuck in its head, I do believe, but that one was never released. I don't particularly know what that would have came with, to be honest. I can't really imagine it being released by itself, as not many people probably would have wanted to buy it. Maybe with a Fourth Doctor, more accurate from the later half of his era. I don't particularly know. But yeah, generally overall, the Vok robots look really cool together. Here we have the final single figure release for this wave, and it is of course another Fourth Doctor villain. This time is the Igon from Terror of the Zygons, one of the most earliest Fourth Doctor stories. I do believe it was in fact maybe one of the ending stories of his first season, or the starting of the second. I can't particularly remember. But yeah, this is the Zygon, also known as Broton, or Bruton in a horrible, not really very good Zygon accent. But yeah, this is once again a figure that was, I do believe, re-released recently in a B&M set, maybe like last year. So it's not as rare as it used to be. It used to be a pretty rare figure, but then of course with the B&M sets coming along, it did kind of ruin that. However, I do believe the paint apps were slightly different on that figure, meaning the original is still probably a little bit better. I do quite like this figure, to be honest, although the articulation and everything else about it is a little bit minimal. Bringing the Zygon closer to the camera, I do naturally apologise for this, because I don't know if I'm the only one, but the Zygons naturally creep me out a little bit. The design is just generally, well, everything about it is a little bit weird, and even them in the story and all of the gestures that they did, if you've seen Terror of the Zygons, you'll of course know what I'm on about. The thing to control their ship, they're all a little bit unusual, but yeah, at the very top, we get this rather sack-like head with veins all over it, and we have little sort of sections that stick out, and it does look rather chunky in parts. Please do not take any of this out of context. And then on the very back we get a little bit of a ridged section once again, along with the different sort of suction cups running down the side, as well as on the sides of the face as well. The face and emotion that generally it is portraying is a little bit unusual. Once again, we get all the stretch marks around the mouth and things, and the eyes have generally been painted rather nicely. I can recall this on the B&M set that was released last year looking a little bit weird, so it's nice to see that this version is a little bit sharper. And then we have lots of different suction cups around the shoulders as well, along with the continuation down the chest, along with the silvery section there, which I think may have been a communicator or something like that. And then we have more veins and things in different sections, almost like a ribbed part there. And then on the back, once again, some more suction cups, and generally a rather nice paint app. We have a really nice mixture of light oranges, dark oranges, really bringing out almost like that odd scaledy, spongish design. And then of course at the very bottom there, we get the rather unusual feet, which once again look a little bit like flippers and are a little bit weird. And then the arms once again have that same paint app, and the hands are generally also being done really nicely as well. Please can I take this away from the camera? It's really creeping me out. Yeah, the Zygons are the ones that sort of, I don't really want to touch it for that long in case I get some like disease. Ton fits in really well with the other 5-inch figures available. He doesn't really have that many to go with, to be honest, because the Fourth Doctor isn't actually from that story. I don't think we have a Brigadier that is accurate to what is seen in that story either, and of course we don't have a giant Scarson as much as I would actually like one, and then a Sarah Jane or a Harry. So generally he's really sort of lurking by himself. He did also come with an accessory which was like a cork device thing, which looks a little bit like a cork, but it was basically like a chunk of wood, that, or at least it looked like a chunk of wood, and you could like communicate with a Scarson or something like that. Basically it was very small, and 9-year-old me decided to misplace it, and I'm still annoyed with him to this day because I don't have one to go with the figure. But yeah, generally it was just a little device thing. You can no doubt Google it of what it looked like. It was generally really small, hence why I lost it. But yeah, nothing really too special, or I would still like one back. Thanks, 9-year-old me, for being annoying. But yeah, generally overall, a really nice figure, and once again, sort of summarising very much a rather Fourth Doctor aimed wave of figures. Finally, to sum up this review, we of course have the collect and build. It is of course the Careworn Robot from the first ever Fourth Doctor story that was conveniently named Robot. Now firstly, I'd just like to state, if Character Options dare ever release this figure again in full, much like how they have with the Tomb Cyber Controller recently, I will be incredibly annoyed. This figure is basically one of the rarest classic figures probably to ever exist. Basically, if you don't get the idea of collect and build, all of these figures that I've been reviewing today came with a certain part of this figure, and then you all stuck it together, and then it would obviously create this thing, and it's probably the best collect and build figure that the Character Options line has ever done, because the Gelf kept on falling apart. The Tomb Cyber Controller is okay, but just a little bit dull. However, this one is larger in scale, really nicely detailed for what it is, and is generally a bloody cool looking thing. And taking a little bit of a closer look, of course, at the very top of the figure, we get the head. The translucent red section has been done really well. I do believe that this is meant to be an eye or something like that. It's where that he can see out of, and we have some rather unusual looking scenes in the story where everything goes red to give a little bit of perspective of how he can see. But we get these different sections over the top that have been painted really well, along with the eyes down here. I do believe it's a really odd design. There's eyes down here, eyes up here. I don't particularly know. I've always sort of classed this big bit at the top as an eye. A sort of handle piece here that always reminds me a little bit of a bucket. And then around the back we do get this different panel section once again, along with the chest unit in the middle. Nothing really too much going on, to be honest. Along piping and tubing sections, we do get a few little nozzle type sections there, along with a few clear sections of plastic replicating the wires as seen on the costume itself. Get the shoulder pad section, which I always think sort of looks like they can fold up to the very top or something like that, a little bit like an old astronaut or something. And then, of course, on the sides, we get the arms once again with a little bit of detailing around the sides of some wires that have been attached. It would have been nice if those were painted in some way. And then we get the claw once again, a little bit of a thin section on this that is a little bit flimsy, so do be warned of that. Do not try to snap it if you, of course, have it, or at least don't drop this on the floor of that facing it, as it could snap, and that will be really annoying. And then, of course, around the middle, we get, once again, a ridge section, exactly the same around the opposite side, where the other arm is, and then we get the crotch section, once again, nothing really too much going on. The legs generally have a lot of different bits of metal designs on, along with sort of a different tubing section here, as well as at the top, and then we get the shoes, which are very fun. Once again, your stereotypical 70s robot, with almost the funnel bits there that always remind me, especially from that part, if I literally just hold that to the camera, you don't think of is those weird trousers from the Wallace and Gromit thing that are bright green, that I honestly don't know where you've been for the last few years, but I just think of that every single time I see those legs and a penguin sticking out the top. But yeah, we get this odd section there at the front to replicate the way that the legs do move. Those are in fact articulated as well. To collect and build, can't get any better. He even has a little accessory. I do believe that this came with the Magnus Greel figure, if I can remember rightly, but yeah, it's a rather odd piece. I think it's a gun. It looks a little bit like a gun. I have a few pin-ups on this. You have a little bit of a bronze section there towards the side, almost a little bit yellow, as well as a button towards the side and the handle at the top. It's generally sculpted rather nicely. I can't recall what it looked like in the actual story, to be honest. I have a feeling it's going to be one of those things that literally appeared for about 5 seconds, and then of course at the very bottom, get this rather flimsy looking section, which is, I'm guessing, the barrel of the gun where it can shoot things. I don't particularly know, but that does fit in his hand rather nicely. It is sort of an odd clawed section, as you can see, so just sliding that in as so, and then he can hold it and sort of shoot people or whatever you so wish. But generally overall, just getting his legs to stand correctly, because he does take a little bit of time. There you go. He looks really fun. So overall, for the first ever wave of classic Doctor Who figures, to be quite honest, this is probably one of the strongest waves that Character Options ever actually produced. I think that we have a really nice variety of Doctors, as well as some really good monsters and villains as well. Of course, this wave was mainly tailored around the 4th Doctor, only one of which not being from the 4th Doctor era, so I think that generally there could have been a little bit more variety there. However, I think that generally all the figures that have been released in this line are really good. I think the Igon is very iconic, same with the Sea Devils as well. Magnus Greel and Mr. Sin are a definite highlight for this wave for me. I think that there are a really nice 2-pack, and Mr. Sin especially, the detail on him for the size is really good, and the same for the Doctors as well. I think the choice to have the 6th Doctor in there, and technically the 5th Doctor as well, even though they're not exactly the most popular Doctors of them all, they are quite nice and vibrant in colour, and the 4th Doctor, of course, he was expected for the first ever wave of classic figures, and the Collect and Build robot as well, exactly the same thing applies. I think that this is probably one of the best Collect and Build figures that Character Options did ever do, because you can tell they're a decent Collect and Build when you can actually think that they are a full-on normal figure, as opposed to an actual figure that you need to build by buying other figures in the range. If you do have the opportunity to buy any of the figures in this line and maybe don't have any of the classic figures, then I do definitely recommend it. However, if you're somebody that does have a few already, of course the 4th Doctor, there isn't really much changes there. You can no doubt buy the Igon for very cheap, considering that it has been released several times already as well, and the same with D84, and of course we did have another version of the Sea Devil. So generally, as I say, if you do want some more unique figures from this wave, definitely the Careworn Robot if you're lucky enough to find that one, and especially Magnus Greel and Mr. Sin, considering that they were never released again. And I suppose SV7 as well, he's a really nice variant. So yeah, generally there is a few rare figures in this line that if you find them at a decent price, I would definitely recommend them. It's a shame that this format of figure didn't in fact continue, because of course in wave 2 we did get a prominently monster and villain wave, so it would be nice to see that continue for more monsters and villains in a wave 3 and wave 4, because that would have been a really good opportunity to see some 60s monsters in there, maybe the Vode, the Monoids, the Celestial Toymaker, pretty much anything from the 60s that isn't a Dalek or Cyberman. So yeah, it is a shame that this format of figure for the classic line didn't continue. However, it was really nice whilst it lasted, and a really good start off for the classic figure line. Yeah, that's really it for this video, and I guess I'll see you all in the next review, whenever that may be. Thanks for watching, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.